What's going on, guys? It's your boy Distant Coder, and today I wanted to bring to you guys a little bit of a discussion about a ruling that caught my eye recently. The ruling in question here is very important because there is a tech card that is played in one of the more played decks of the format right now, which is Fluanderies, that would potentially interact a unique way with Guardian Chimera. The card in question, obviously, is Book of Moon. Basically, the ruling in question here is asking if the effect of Guardian Chimera is activated once it's fusion summoned, and you chain Book of Moon to that Guardian Chimera, would the effect of Guardian Chimera still resolve and destroy and draw cards, or would it simply resolve without effect? Now, the effect of Guardian Chimera reads, if this card is fusion summoned by a spell card effect, you can draw cards equal to the number of cards used as material from the hand, and if you do, destroy cards your opponent controls equal to the number of cards used as material from the field. Now, the reason why this is up for debate is specifically because when a fusion monster is changed from face up to face down defense position, every single one of the properties of the cards used to fusion summon this card is forgotten by the fusion monster. This includes the attribute and type of the cards that were summoned, the number of cards summoned, and currently up for debate, whether or not that card was used as material from hand, from field, or from elsewhere. So for this specific interaction, there are two key factors that come into play. The first one being whether or not the Guardian Chimera checks where the materials were fusion summoned from when the effect activates or when the effect resolves. In the case where it would check where the materials came from, when it activates, it will not matter whether or not the Guardian Chimera is face up or face down. However, if it checks it as it resolves, by the time it resolves, it is face down because of the Book of Moon. So if it does forget where the materials were fusion summoned from, then it would not be able to pop or draw any cards, so it will not be able to verify how many cards it needs to draw or how many cards it needs to pop. The second thing that needs to be taken into consideration here is whether or not the fact that a card is used as material from hand or from field or from elsewhere is a specific property that the fusion monster forgets about its fusion materials when it's flipped face down. So what I mean by this is that normally when you fusion summon a fusion monster, if you Book of Moon it, it forgets any and all properties about the cards that were used for its fusion summon. So for example, if you were to Book of Eclipse a Dragoon and then flipping it back up, it would forget that the materials that it used for its fusion summon were normal monsters, so it would no longer be able to pop anything. So the thing that needs to be taken into consideration here is whether or not the fact that a monster was used from hand or from field for the fusion summon of Guardian Chimera is or is not something that is forgotten based upon the monster being flipped face down. Now, the reason why both of these factors are basically put into question here and no one's able to agree upon this is specifically because we do not have any precedent that is an exact one-to-one with the situation with Guardian Chimera. There's a couple of other rulings that come quite close, and we're going to look at a couple of those because I have done my research, and we're going to basically discuss this and see if we can't find an understanding or an agreement as to how this specific interaction should be ruled. So before we look at these individual rulings, I would just like to explain where exactly I get these rulings from. So a lot of the time in the TCG and TCG judges, they won't want you to talk about the forbidden archives, but the forbidden archives in this situation are the OCG database. So in the TCG, we do not have a rulings database. However, on the official Yu-Gi-Oh! Card website in the OCG, so in all of the Asian languages on that website, you can find an OCG rulings database. Now, over on YG Organization, they've translated the majority of the OCG database so that it's accessible to those of us that do not speak any of those languages. For the most part, for the TCG judges, we're not supposed to use it, but a lot of us judges like to use this as a resource nonetheless, because the majority of the rulings in this database also translate one-to-one for the TCG. So I am going to be using the OCG database to find precedents that could potentially answer this ruling question. So do keep in mind and take it with a grain of salt that in the TCG, we are not supposed to use this database one-to-one, but a lot of us judges do use this as a resource to find rulings because a lot of it does translate very well over to the TCG. So for the first entry here that we have from the database is a ruling with Book of Moon or Compulsory Evacuation Device versus Infernoid Tiara, and it reads as follows. Book of Moon or Compulsory Evacuation Device was activated in a chain to the activation of the effect of Infernoid Tiara that was fusion summoned using 5 or more different Infernoid monsters as fusion materials. In this case, how does the effect of Infernoid Tiara resolve? Even in that case, the effect of Infernoid Tiara resolves normally. Each dotted point effect is applied accordingly to the number of different fusion materials that were used for Infernoid Tiara. Now, the reason why this ruling is close to the Guardian Chimera example but isn't exactly the answer for it is specifically because the effect of Infernoid Tiara checks how many fusion materials were used to fusion summon it at the moment of activation, as opposed to the effect of Guardian Chimera, which does not read the same as Infernoid Tiara and doesn't make it clear whether or not it checks for the number of fusion materials and where they were used from at activation or when the effect resolves. This next example is actually a really interesting one. It has to do with the monster called Cyber's Clock Dragon, and it reads as follows. When I fusion summon Cyber's Clock Dragon and activate its effect, my opponent chains Compulsory Evacuation Device and returns Cyber's Clock Dragon to the extra deck. In that case, how does the effect of Cyber's Clock Dragon resolve? In this scenario, you still send cards from the top of the deck to the graveyard equal to the total link ratings of the fusion materials used, and your other monsters still cannot attack until the end of the next turn. But the part of the effect that increases the attack of Cyber's Clock Dragon cannot be applied. So just to clarify, the effect of Cyber's Clock Dragon reads as follows. When this card is fusion summoned, you can send cards from the top of your deck to the graveyard equal to the total link rating of the materials used for this card's fusion summon. And if you do, until the end of the next turn, other monsters you control cannot attack. Also, this card gains 1000 attack for each card sent to the graveyard by this effect. So the reason why this ruling with Cyber's Clock Dragon does not translate one-to-one with the Guardian Chimera is specifically because this ruling with Cyber's Clock Dragon has it leave the field rather than be set face down. In terms of whether or not Cyber's Clock Dragon checks how many cards it's going to send from the deck to the graveyard, it actually checks it when the effect resolves rather than when the effect is activated. However, this specific ruling does not use Book of Moon, it uses Compulsory Evacuation Device. And as we know, a monster leaving the field does not make it forget the same things as when the monster is flipped face down. So because this ruling has nothing to do with actually being flipped face down, it isn't a ruling that can be translated one-to-one with Guardian Chimera. Now, this last database entry that I want to look at is actually something that you might not initially think is related to the Guardian Chimera example, but it actually is, and I'll explain why. So the card in question that we're talking about here is Frightful Wolf, and the effect of Frightful Wolf reads as follows. This card can attack a number of times each battle phase up to the number of fusion materials used for its fusion summon. Now, it is known here that the Frightful Wolf will forget how many fusion materials were used for its fusion summon and will lose those additional attacks if the Frightful Wolf is set face down and then flipped back up. Now, you'd initially think, Coder, why does that relate to the Guardian Chimera example? Well, this shows that when a monster is flipped face down, it forgets the number of materials that were used for its fusion summon. And this is one of those properties that isn't exactly outlined on the card. The Frightful Wolf example does show that the number of fusion materials is also a property that is forgotten. Perhaps that is a little bit of, insight into the fact that potentially where the fusion materials were used from is also a property that is forgotten. However, from my own research, I have found nothing in the database that would indicate one way or another whether or not a monster forgets where its fusion materials were used as fusion material from, as opposed to the number of fusion materials that were used. However, I think that this Frightful Wolf example does show to us that more than just what is exactly indicated on the card is a property that is forgotten when the fusion monsters flip face down. So in my opinion, I do think that where the materials are used from is a property that should be forgotten by the fusion monster if that fusion monster is flipped face down. So after looking at these database entries, you guys now have a better understanding as to why these, very well-versed judges aren't able to come to an agreement about whether or not the Guardian Chimera would still successfully resolve its effect, or if its effect would resolve unsuccessfully. If you want my personal opinion, I genuinely think that the Guardian Chimera does check where the materials were used from upon its own activation rather than when the effect resolves. However, from the text of the card, I can genuinely understand why some people think that it might check where the materials were fusion summoned from when the effect resolves rather than when the effect activates. What I will say about this is if you are playing Book of Moon and want to know whether or not this interaction works or doesn't work for any event that you go to, you should absolutely bring this to your head judge before the event occurs, and make sure that you ask the head judge and they will give you their ruling for that event. So keep in mind, when a head judge issues a ruling for an event, it is okay and correct for that event specifically. So anyways, guys, that was it for this ruling discussion. Leave me in the comments below what you guys think. Do you think that the Book of Moon should prevent the Guardian Chimera's effect from resolving, or do you think that it is correct that the Guardian Chimera does still successfully resolve if you chain Book of Moon to its effect? Let me know what you guys think, and I hope you guys learned something new, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace!